Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, up to the beginning of Discourse 17, Chapter 64, page Kufchav 120. The name of this discourse is Atem Netzovim Hayim, Shabbos Parshat Netzovim, Tov Reish Ayin Beis. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in his brief summary of the beginnings of his discourse, says about this one, Makif HaKloli, Tehiri Law, V'tihira Tata, Makif HaPrati. Which should be read Makif HaKloli, Tehiri Law, V'tihira Tata, and then Makif HaPrati. Which is exactly where we're at. In the last discourse, discussion has been about transcendence. The language of Chassidus, Makif. Its impact on us, on our existence. So after establishing that it's a very much part of our reality, the previous chapters, he broke down the transcendence, and that even though transcendence by definition is an equalizer, there are levels, makifim. Each world, each dimension has its makif. The last example he gave for that is when you want to build a home, a structure. So you have the Ratzon Klali, the overall desire, which has the details, but those details are on a different level there. As you said, two key distinctions. The details are not distinct, they're all concealed there. And number two, the energy, the intensity, is equal in all of them when it's in that Ratzon Klali. You don't distinguish and say this is more important, less important. You're focusing on the totality, the synergy of the entire structure. Then there's the Ratzon Prati when it comes down to actuality. So before you even implement, you have what's called the guiding force that directs each part of that implementation. So essentially, in terms of transcendence, the divine desire for each part of existence helps that part of existence connect to its particular transcendent element. And then there's the connection to the overall transcendent. But the way he worked here, he began first with the overall transcendent, the Makif Kloli. Namely, Tehiri Law and Tehira Tata. The level of Tehiri Law is the higher purity or the higher shining, which is the way it's foreseen or perceived or allocated. Shir Asme Bekeach, the envisioning of the existence as it is pure, completely in the divine light, in the divine energy before the Tzimtzum, that's Tehiri Law. Another name for it is Atzilus, the Klolos, the general Atzilus, macrocosmic Atzilus, the 10 hidden spheres, Malchus, the Ein Sof. That will become the Igul Hagadol. Once there's a Tzimtzum, will be a great sphere. And then Tehira Tata is that same dimension manifests now in existence, as it's called also Makif Klali, but this is now the map or the seed that contains the entire picture from beginning of time to the end of time of all time and space. That's Ak. The Igulim Avak surround all of existence, the entire everything that will come into being in this Cholol Amokampani, in this black hole, in this empty space, once the Kav begins doing its work. So this Ak is the first reality that comes and merges after the Tzimtzum, or the first reality actually is the Kav. But the Kav, first entity, I should say, the first entity is Ak. It encompasses everything, and this is called the Ratzon Klali, Machshava HaKeduma Da'ak, all different names, the primordial, the primal will or desire that encompasses it all. Its impact on existence, he explained, is the general bittul, the general you could say sublimation, the general receptivity of existence, which is not conscious within existence except in the form of the mere form of a certain stream shines in, which is our ability to receive divine energy, life itself. A deeper level in the souls is the Amunah, the simple Amunah that brings a person to Mesiras Nefesh. Or as he explained further, the Kabbalah Soil, Malchus Shamayim, of Nasa v'Nishma, accepting the entirety of what God wants of us. And then comes the effect of the Tehira Law. The higher Tehira is the Mesiras Nefesh, not of the soul, but of the body. When one gives of their body, one surrenders, when one offers, like an offering, their body, that's the level of Tahiri law's impact, which is of course not revealed because the body is not conscious of anything, but it's that ability that for it to do such a thing that comes from the body, and that is like Yom Kippur. It's also like Purim. He doesn't say it here, but the discourses that are the sources for this mimer are Purim Maimorim, Kimu v'Kiblu HaYehudim, and as v'Kiblu HaYehudim Asher Echelu Lasis. So the Torah and the Maimorim that discuss this, the Mitla Rebbe, Shari Eira, and then in Tzemach Tzedek and Eretz Torah, they all discuss this idea as context of Purim. That Matan Torah, that Avram Avinu was just a revelation of Neshama. Matan Torah had already a Makif, Nasa v'Nishma, as he explained here. And Purim has the ability even to affect the Mesiras Nefesh of the body. That goes even deeper. And then we start now the discussion of the Makifim Pratim. The last chapter, 63, was an addition to these two general transcendent forces. The desire of wanting something outside of oneself, outside of the essence. Now comes that each particular world has its particular Ratzon, or Keser. That was what we studied in chapter 63. And he said that basically, as I described before, like in the house, the desire to have a home has the general desire, and then it has the specific desires for each particular section of that structure. Okay, so now we'll continue in chapter 64, which begins the new Maimer, Atem Netzovim, page 120. Atem Netzovim Ayem Kulchem Ufnei Hashem Elokeichem Resheichem Shiftechem. You stand before all of you together. You stand today, all of you together before God. Resheichem Shiftechem, from the heads of your tribes, and then he continues to enumerate the different categories, the different of the class structure of the Jewish people. And it's known wherever it says Hayim today, Koyal Yem de Rosh Hashanah is referring to Rosh Hashanah. So Hayim, the today, is going on Rosh Hashanah. So also here what it says, you stand. When do you stand? It's referring to Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah Netzovim kulam lefnei Hashem, because in Rosh Hashanah everyone stands together before God. But tzarich lahav ma'in the Rosh Hashanah dafka Netzovim kulam lefnei Hashem. So we have to understand why Rosh Hashanah dafka. What specifically in Rosh Hashanah causes them to stand together? V'him Netzovim hu lo shenifalim ilmayla. Netzovim does not mean that you rise, and your effort. Netzovim lo shenifal means like the result of, as if someone else made you stand. Atem Netzovim, that you are being stood upright, so to speak. Shenifalim ilmayla, that this is affected from above. Here again, you start seeing the hints to, is it coming from above, is it coming from below, all the different impacts. We have to understand what is this that the souls of Israel are impacting. The Nefalim Umayla are being impacted, or are a result of, a consequence of, but being impacted from above. We also have to understand what he breaks down and delineates, delineates the different levels of the souls of Israel. Reshechem Shiftechem, the heads of the tribes. Then goes Kinechem, your elders, and the last one is at the end is the Shev Memecha, Chet Vitzecha v'Shev Memecha, which is it doesn't mention that here, but just to give you the spectrum, Chet Vitzecha are the wood choppers and the ones that carry your water carriers. Didn't he first say all of you? So why then is it necessary to distinguish, to delineate, and specify all the specific levels? He said all of you together. That's the emphasis. Why now break it down into the 10 different categories? Well, the Havan calls that, to understand all this, we have to preface that which was discussed earlier, that the infinite light that comes in the form of makif for the worlds Yesh b'zeh beis b'chinas. Has within the two levels. Beis b'chinas makifim has two levels of makifim. B'chinas makav hakloli and makav haprati. An overall general encompassing force, or transcendent force, and prati, a more individual, distinct one. Makav hakloli shachar tzimtzum, and the makav hakloli after the tzimtzum, because there's the makav hakloli before the tzimtzum. That's the Hirei law. Hu b'chinas machshava gdum da'ak is the primordial thought within akum. Makav haprati is b'chinas keser d'atzilus. An individual makav is the level of keser d'atzilus, chulu, of course also keser bria, and so on. Because now the primordial thought of ak, even though it encompasses everything, nevertheless, from this could not come the creation and actuality. Because in that primordial thought, all the worlds, all the levels are all equalized. And it was explained, that this equalization is in two ways, is in two elements. One, the Giluyim. As he said, because the Oyer is equal in everything. The Yeshleim, you can say, the Kamoshem Ba'ak Meir Ba'asiyah Ba'ashav Kamei Ba'atzilis. The Yeshleim, the Kamoshem Ba'ak, the way all these levels are nak, Meir Ba'asiyah Ba'ashav Kamei Ba'atzilis. The energy within Asiya is equal to the way it's in Atzilus. He says Yashlema because he didn't actually spell that out earlier in the last chapter. He just said that the said in two inyanim, the expression there was that the is equal everywhere. Here he actually spells it out. That means that the in Asiya, there inak, within the machshava, within that great thought, is equal. He did say the other way around, that afterwards when they come out, there's a distance, a great distance between Asiya and Atzilus. Actually, I can't say they didn't say. He did say, he does say that they're equal. But here, so the Yeshleim, he repeats again. He actually did say it. I correct that. But he didn't actually say Asiya and Atzilus Shavim. Those words he didn't actually say. But the content was there. Va'beis, and another distinguisher between Makiv Kloli and Makiv Prati. In other words, that which is in the general desire and how it comes into a specifics in Atzilus. Sham b'chinas mitzias built in the keres. In Ak, they are mitzias, an existence that is indistinguishable. So there's no distinction between one level and the next. So in other words, this is not talking about the gilui, how intense the acts, that the desire is that intensity is equal everywhere. Now we're talking about the actual item itself, the category. If you remember earlier, when he spoke about Milo Mata, he spoke about the spatial structure of the spheres in the worlds, the Rebbe Rashab first began saying that they're distinct in Ribuya Miut. What's the distinction between Chachma and Bina, let's say, or Atzilus and Bria? That one has more divine energy, meaning it's more aware of the divine, more consciousness, more bittul therefore, and one is less. But then he said, in truth, they're really fundamentally, be'etzem adregosam, they're different. Chachma and Bina are not just distinguishable by quantity. No, it's Bina is diminished Chachma. No, they're two different entities. And because they're two different entities with different personalities, one is more of a yesh, one is to understand in detail. The other one is more just getting the idea. Therefore, one has more energy than the other. So you could compare that to these two things here. So machshava gduma, so that's when they come out into reality. That one has more energy, one has less energy. Chachma obviously has more intensity and more energy, more power, more brain power, so to speak, or more divine power, if you wish, than Bina. But then there's a key distinction between the two. In Ak, both those elements of Milo Mata that we spoke earlier in the whole Pnimi at length are both not there. Both the energy of Chachma and Bina are equal. Bina is getting as much energy as Chachma, or as he says here, Asiya gets is in that level as equal to Atzilus. And secondly, their distinction in their personality. That Chachma is a different personality than Bina. Just like Midas Midas is not just diminished intelligence. Midas has its own parameters. That in the Ratzon, that wants the whole structure, God who wants the Dira B'Tachtenim, He wants a world, an existent world. On that level, these distinctions are not there. So you're not going to be able to define a Chachma or a Bina in Ak, even though there's Chachma Bina in Ak, but we're now talking the Gulim of Ak. Let's remember that, the Makif of Ak. While I'm at it, I should add something. Someone asked me a question. I think I clarified it, but I'll state it again. I keep saying that Tehiri Law is the level of Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, and that's the level of Makif HaKloli. Didn't we learn at length that before the Tzimtzum there's two levels? The root of Seviv is Kaidem Alei Saratzen. Before he arose the desire that he wants 10 spheres. So before he allocated Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, he measured within himself and allocated a certain structure. That's the root of Seviv. The root of Mamalaklam, of Pnimi, is the 10 spheres. At length, chapters after chapter, he was discussing that you have to say the energy, there's also levels. Chesed and Gvura, Chachma and Bina. All the way in the root in the 10 spheres, because he said the 10 spheres are not just the root of the containers like the Parda says, but they're also the root of the energy. And suddenly here we're talking Esher Spheres Sagnuzah, so Tiri Law in the context of Makif. So the truth is the Rebbe Rashav himself qualified it. When he went over and began discussing the two levels of Makif Kloli, Makif Prati, which began, let's just go back, it's always go back to the beginning, to the point of departure. So he began discussing Makif Kloli, Makif Prati in chapter 59 is where he first mentioned it. So he said there, Hine HaMakav HaKlol B'chinas HaRotzen HaPoshet Shebei Netzov B'chinas Tiri Law. Because relative to the worlds, even the general desire that's already for 10 spheres, from a perspective of the world, that's not Pnimi. It may be the root of it, but on that level, it's a desire for all of existence. Like he says, B'chinas Havdalah Mehem. Then he adds in parentheses, Ve'ikah b'chinas hasev v'mashalayla ma'rotzen. And he says he's going to explain that later. That's his seder is kloli. So in truth, yes, the discussion that what is the root of pnimi, of immanent energy, is truly tehirei law, in the words here. But there's an element of it that's makif, because of its all-encompassing nature. And it includes even ak, which is also the beginning, you can say, of immanent energy. It's coming from the kav. But the transcendent dimensions of Atzmus, of Eir Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, now manifest also on these levels. So though we didn't spell it out in aggressive detail, but you have to say that once there's a desire for it, there's also the element that it's still coming from that transcendent energy. And I refer you also back to the end of that chapter 59, that key chapter. So he said then, he said there that it's a rotzen, that even though the desire arose in that level to want to have the spheres, they're all equal there. I'm reading on top of page 110. And he explained, meaning, from the perspective, he said, besides the fact that the makif itself, like the specific makifim, each one is a form of meaning not shefa. They're just a reflection of their source, and they're not commensurate, they're not impacted, and doesn't require effort to enter into the containers. In addition to that, hamshachas the makif gufa, even that which will become pnimi, which means that which he envisioned 10 spheres. B'shoshi says the hashara, that he envisions that there will be that energy will radiate, will illuminate and manifest in Gvul, Eir of Chesed, Eir of Gura, Eir ze atzmo b'chinas shefa derech moshel, hamshachas Eir makiv hainu me'eir ein sof hu b'chinas Eir. In other words, the way Eir sees it, the way you look at it from above, it's an Eir, not a shefa. Even though it will later manifest and become a shefa. In other words, it will become an primi, an immanent energy. So just qualifying to say that in the immanent energy itself, the root of the immanent energy, there's an element of makif, and there's the element how it becomes later the root of immanent energy. Obviously, all this will come together as we learn further, but just to qualify things. So yes, the first 46 chapters, he was focusing how the 10 hidden spheres is the root of the Er HaGvul. But remember, that's how the Er HaSeviv envisions the Er HaGvul. That's what he said here. Okay. So now let's continue on. So we have both elements in Ak, as opposed to Er Pnimi, an immanent energy, where, as you said earlier, the distinction is both on the actual level of each sphere, each world, and also the intensity of energy. In Ak, both those things are equalized. You could say an example for it, let's say if you look at a seed as opposed to a tree. So a seed, there's two things going on there that distinguish it from the tree. One is all the elements of the tree are there, yes, correct. But number one, they're not distinct. You can't distinguish between a branch, a root, a leaf, a fruit, the trunk, and so on. It's one thing. The second thing is that the so-called the energy within the seed that's going to go into a limb or into a trunk or into even to the last final branch of the tree is equal. You're not going to say a part of the seed this is the limb part and this part is the trunk. There, everything is developing all together. Once it actually becomes a physical tree, there'll be a big distinction. There's no question more moisture and liquid goes, let's say, to the trunk of the tree than goes to a distant branch. And the tree will allocate resources to each part of the tree according to its needs. But at this point, the resources are equal. The energy is equal. And also the distinction of their each particle, so to speak, or each particular element that comes out of the seed is also equalized. Just as an example. And therefore, all the worlds there are there without any distinction. This is the second element. In addition to the energy being equal in all of them, meaning, and I say energy like in this case, the resources, the mind power, the brain power. When a person is envisioning a structure, there's no real distinction where you could say, okay, this part of his brain is focusing on the kitchen, and this part of the brain is focusing on the living room. Even in that Beis HaMikdash, where the Kodesh Kadashim is the central point, but everything, the desire of it, the plan of it, the whole picture, the whole Beis HaMikdash is necessary. So when it comes out in actuality, there's of course a distinction between one section and the next. Now this doesn't take away if someone will say, 1 second, my thought, I'm thinking, okay, the main reason I want my house is for this and this room. Yeah, but you're already focusing on a particular room. We're talking about when you focus on the general desire for a structure. And that desire does not distinguish between one brick and the next and one element of the structure or another. In order for there to be the existence of the worlds and in diverse and in a diverse or distinguishable. The word ischalkus here would be diversity. Ischalkus in a separate way, each with its own particular component. For this you need to have an individual desire, not a rotzen klali. Rotzen prati, b'chol elam k'may shehu. in each world according to as it is. This is the level of Kesed Atzilus, the crown or the desire of Atzilus, which is the individual, the distinct and individual desire for the world of Atzilus. So in other words, we don't just jump from general transcendence, Makiv Kloli, to Pnimi, to immanence. Each immanent department has its transcendent department. This particular transcendence that informs that department. Think of it like this. Think of it like if you have a hierarchy in a company that's a big company. So you have department heads, and then you have the head of the whole entity. And if it's a very big company, you can have many such layers. You can have there's a team that's working on one level. They have a head of that department. Then there's the head of that whole department and of many teams. Then you can have all the departments together, and then all of them come together under the head of one COO or CEO. So why do you need to have the heads of departments? Why don't you just have the top guy just telling everybody what to do? Or you could have one lieutenant. Because each department, because they're focusing on particular functions, they won't get it done properly if they don't have somebody who's coordinating within that group itself. So the way it works in the world is that, yes, you need to have one person, because on the other hand, if you only have department heads and you don't have one overall head, there's also lack of coordination. So you have one person who knows the whole vision. He articulates it to a bunch of department heads. Those department heads, each one will take their team and inform them, each one of their function. And he makes sure that his team is working in a coordinated and efficient way. Then reports back, and he makes sure everything is aligned. Because we are dealing in existence of details. If this existence was an amorphous one, and details didn't matter, it's one thing. But remember, why God wanted a structure of such details, we'll never know. But that's what he wanted. Because he wanted a world the way he wanted it, like this, it requires esesphiris, which is the whole length of discussion of immanent energy. It's distinct. Chochmah is not bina. The keli is one way, and the keli of another is another. The oyer has to fit each keli. A length elaborated how each one is tailored to each other. Because you need that for the structure. But now when you talk about guiding the structure, the same is true. That's why he said before, how do you say there's levels in makifim? Because he says the makif is shaykh la pnimi. This governing force called desire is like the head of a team. He's a head. He may not even be involved in any particular function. All he's doing is supervising and directing and strategizing and guiding. But he is connected to his particular team. So you have one that's an overall corporate chief, head, the commander-in-chief, then there are the generals, and then there are the colonels, etc., etc. And all the entire hierarchy of any given structure. So you need to have a Ratzon, the captain, not only the general one, but also the specific one. Just to make it more palatable. And only when you have both ends of it does it work properly in a structure like ours. Now, the difference is, relevant to us, is that you talk about, let's say, an army or a corporate structure or any other structure, there, it's just a relationship in the context of he's leading you or governing or controlling or supervising, coordinating. He's a coordinator. Here we're talking about actual levels that give life to existence. So we're not just talking about the Ratzon here is just happened to be appointed to be a supervisor over its department called Atzilus. It actually is the force, as you said earlier, that Makif actually brings things into life. So here it gets much richer, the relationship, and much deeper, because this Ratzon actually is giving life to the whole entity. Like that's where I go back to the seed. It's not just a governor that's controlling and saying, okay, here, you do this, you do that. You're talking about actual force that's giving life through immanent energy, and it's invisible, it's concealed, except for the impact that we said it has the impact on the faith and so on. So here there's also a relationship, the way it gives life, and also a relationship that we can connect to it. To use the example I gave, the corporate example, I would say, let's say an individual person on a team has a particular talent, and he comes to the coordinator, the Ratzon, so to speak, the Kesser of that team, and says, I heard the plan, I have a thought. And he gives a thought that actually enhances the plan. Or enhances his ability to work on the plan. So there's no question, there's information flowing back and forth from these two, that The individual can inform the desire, and the desire can inform the individual. Even though he's not talking about how the individual informs the desire, that I'm just using as myself an example. But I mean to say that there is a communication between the two. They're not just two different worlds. As a result of that, in other words, the makif, like let's say the team leader will say to everybody, so what do you think? And they'll say things, and let's say he'll adjust the plan accordingly. That really doesn't fit here because God is not adjusting the plan according to our opinions. But I'm just saying it as an example to explain how there is a connection, a communication between the two. In our case, it's only a one-way communication. It's the desire that speaks to the faculties don't speak back, as we discussed, or have an impact. But the point is, there is a communication from the captain, from the coordinator, from the rotzen, from the makif to the primi. As a result, however, as I said, it's not it doesn't give life to it. In this case, the details not only get life from there, the team players are not only, the team individuals are not only get life from it, they also get direction from it. And it has an impact on them. So one particular person on the team will be able to connect to that desire and have an impact, like he said. In Aveda, that would be like if he has Amunah Pshuta, or if he has that his body, Mesiras Haguf, Mesiras HaNefesh from the body. In other words, there's something from the general commander of that particular, or in this case, Makiv Klali, that actually informs and affects the individuals besides the job that they do. And in our case, as I said, it gives life, and it gives more than just life. So now he's continuing in chapter 64. It's also understood why we need to have why we need to have an individual desire. He's giving now another reason why it has to come down into specifics. Arotzen prati, rather, that you need to have a makif that is also like the team, the department head. The words I used before. He's giving another reason. Is because though the primordial thought of Ak encompasses all the world, nevertheless, you still need to have an individual desire. So till now, the reason he gave was because without that, you have everything included in this department head. The energy level isn't equal to all details, and second of all, there's no distinction between them. Here, obviously, he's going to go further to explain it even further. Why you need to have an individual desire. You need to have an individual department head, an individual captain or commander or desire, rotzen, for Atzilus, for Bria, Keser, Atzilus, and so on. Because it's known that there's two types of desire. Which means also in the rotzen that's higher than tam v'das. Because before, if you remember, he kept speaking in general that there's two rotzen. One is a rotzen al pi tam v'das, which means like a bitl al pi tam v'das, that you desire something, but it's coming from a rational process. And then there's a rotzen that's beyond rational, super rational. Here he's saying even in the rotzen shel man v'tam v'das, there's two types of desire. In the parenthesis he adds, he's giving the exact name for it. One is rotzen hanelam, the concealed desire, v'rotzen hagoli, the revealed desire. Another way of putting it, or another term for it, another name for it, koyach harotzen, the power of desire, v'rotzen, and the desire itself. So he's going to explain these two types of desire. It's interesting, these two types of desire that are discussed here in Samach Vov, and I believe mentioned from Tafshin Yud B'Sukkos Teshvu, and in Imre Bina, and Ashar Yichud, and in plenty of places, Tzemach Tzedek, they bring these two desires, when they discuss Tehiri La and Tehiri Tata. These two desires are brought there. But let's see where he goes here with this, because here obviously he's developing it even further. So he says there's two desires. Echad hu rotzen mamish. The first is actual rotzen, desire. Obviously the lower level. Tahainu kishe yichpid be'ezeh davar. That means when he desires something in some matter, be'ezeh davar, any which matter thing, Acha timshach nafshel of mamish, till his soul, his spirit, is drawn to it, mamish literally, v'yitel ledovarahu lidabek elov ulasige, and he leans toward that thing. He's inclined toward that thing, lidabek elov, to cleave to it, to connect to it, ulasige, and to acquire it. Definition of ratzon. Remember, we spoke tainug is the contentment. You're content with yourself. You are to yourself. But not talking tainug now. We spoke before in chapter 1. He said, before there's a desire, a person is just intact. Desire means there's something you want. What is that defined in technical terms? You desire something, therefore you're drawn to it, therefore you get inclined to it, therefore you go out to acquire it. That's the rotzen. It's inclination and being drawn to anything. This could be a physical thing, a spiritual thing, whatever it may be. And this is not for particularly any reason or comprehension. That the reason should be the cause for your desire. In that case, without the reason, you wouldn't desire it. Here, we're not talking about that. There's no reason you don't go for it. Here, he's talking rather, not for a reason, on his own. There's just something in him that desires and is drawn to that particular item. The parentheses, he now qualifies this. How long is this parenthesis? To the end. Till the end? Okay. Fine. So all this is still, he's going to be speaking still about the first level of desire. I see chapter Samachay is the second level. So he goes like this. You must say, definitely, there's some inner kavanah. In other words, it's not some type of wild, just passion without any intention. Well, actually, it could be a wild passion, but there is a kavanah within this. But this kavanah, this intention, this interest, so to speak, is not in the level of reason and comprehension. And he's going to explain now. There's all the parentheses till the end of the chapter 64. So, bear with me. Because there's a desire that's completely higher than kavanah. And it doesn't have any intention at all. That's a ratzon atzmi that we call an essential desire. That's from the atzma, the essence of the individual. And he's going to give an example he gave also earlier when he spoke about the keiches. If you remember, he spoke about midas. So he spoke about emotions, that emotions are, as opposed to seichel, emotions are a diminished level of energy because they're defined, etc., etc. He said, what about when a father has? He said, call that ratzon tivi, midas tivim. He called that's more ratzon than it is emotions. He said that earlier, much earlier on in the chapters about Mailamata, I believe. Here we go, chapter 33. He said that. He says, he wants himself, basically. He wants his essence, because it's a piece of him. It's not a midah. A midah is when you're drawn to something outside of yourself. Anyway, I'm just qualifying to explain this. Okay, so what does he say? What's ratzon atzmi? Exactly what he said there. Example of the desire of a father to a son, or a child to a father. Ben here means son, but it could also be child. That's a essential desire that does not have a kavanah. It doesn't need a kavanah. Why? Because it's not even if it has a purpose, like father will say, "I love my son. I'm going to take him somewhere. We're going to go on a trip. We'll learn together. We'll speak together." There's a kavanah. But what's the driving force? Is the goal here? Like when you're doing a business deal and you say, I have a desire now to go in partnership with somebody. There is the partnership that drives the desire. Because you want this partnership, so therefore you go ahead and you make an alliance with another person. When it comes to your son or child, Yes, you may have an intention today, let's do this together, and there's a seichel in it. But what's the driving force? The driving force is because you're one with him. Anything like that, when you have a midah, for example, when you have a derotson to go into partnership with someone in business, the desire there is the business. You have no fundamental, essential connection with your partner. As some like to say, you go to a partnership not because you like the person, but because you can't do it without him. With a child, it's coming from an atzmizdika connection. You have an atzmizdika connection. Therefore, you want to spend time. Therefore, you want to do something that may have a kavanah. So the bottom line is, a ratzon atzmi is rooted in some type of fundamental connection to the thing, and it doesn't need to have a reason. It definitely doesn't need to have a kavanah. It doesn't have a reason. I'm saying it doesn't need a kavanah, and it also definitely doesn't need a reason. I should have corrected myself.
But is there such thing as ratzon atzmi by human beings? I mean,
he just says ratzna aval ben, ratzna ben alav, because they're one. That's where it comes down to. In other words, you find even situations where a son, even a ben seir meira, even someone who's completely defies his father, and every possible way the father becomes an enemy. There's a love that a father can never cut out because he's part of his flesh and blood. The question is whether a child has that to a father too. Tanya says that a child will do everything to save his father's life. But there's a connection. Bottom line is there's a connection that precedes their logic.
How many fathers just want to cut off relationships with the sons and don't want to have anything to do with them?
Yeah, but I'm saying even when times when something happens like that, the father still has terrible pain over it. It's not like a stranger. He just said, "Okay, we were friends and goodbye." Bottom line is the point is there's an atzmizdika connection. Atzmizdika connection simply means in this context. Obviously, at the end of the day, when you speak atzmos compared to we're flesh and we're human beings. In atzmos, you could say he needs nothing. So when you say something is atzmizdik by him, it's coming completely from his essence. But that's just a distinction that needs to be qualified. Here, for all practical purposes, the best way to understand is compare it to other ritzainus. There are things you want that are completely optional. You want it. You don't have it. It's not going to, Then there are things you want very strongly. But they're still not necessarily atzmizdika rotzen. They're not necessarily coming from an atzmizdika place. Atzmizdika place, I have to define, means it's part of who you are. In other words, all the reasoning behind why you want to sit with your son and learn, all the good reasons, you want to teach him, you want to educate him, you want to spend time with him, it comes because he's your son. And that's why you have also a pihalach, you have even a bias to that. Because you would love your son no matter what. Therefore, you're going to find reasons, so to speak, for your relationship with him. He's not going to say that part, I'm just trying to explain that even though there's a reason maybe involved, but the reason is a result of the atzmi. Whereas the other way around, like I said, let's say your business relationship, when you're finished with the business relationship, you have no connection to that person. I'm not talking about if you became friends and you could also have chaverim that have atzmizdika connection. I'm not getting into that. A father is the best example because a father is literally, from the second the child is conceived, there's just a connection between the father and a child. I know when he says Av and Ben here, I think a mother and child is the same thing. Because he's not talking here about what he says in Tanya that's coming from the Etzem, the Chochmah, right, that type of thing. So, but the point of the matter is there's an atzmizdika connection. Okay, let's continue here. It's all the parentheses, by the way, to explain, all this is coming to explain that the Ratzon does not have any given reason. It's just what he wants and is drawn to something. She says, for sure there's a kavanah primis, but that kavanah is also not a level of reason. Then he goes and says there's a Ratzon that doesn't even have a kavanah, completely higher than kavanah. I'm not sure if I would explain it this way, but perhaps basically he's breaking it three different types. There's a Ratzon for a reason. A reason would be very simple. You're hungry. I see an apple on a tree. I have a desire to take it. There's a reason. You're hungry. You wouldn't be hungry, you wouldn't do it. There's no connection between you and the apple. You don't need to have an apple. You're hungry. A kavanah would be that there's no necessarily rational reason, but there's an interest. It could be irrational. It could be a taiva. It could be something you see that could even be destructive.
It's enticing, maybe.
So it's a kavanah. There's a kavanah. You have an intention. Here he's saying, but there's a ratzon atzmi that's l'mayla mekavanah. So let's see how he explains this. Shu ratzon atzmi b'li shum kavanah. This desire of a father to child to a father, is without a kavanah. Shalapamim harizababi is galus shanimshach mishteking me'ed begaguim gdelim. At times, this connection between the two, the desire, comes out revealed, shenimshach, that he's drawn, mishtekik, and he very much desire, mishtekik, very much, tshuka, mishtekik. Tshuka is more than desire. Tshuka, almost like a taiva tshuka. He's a strong, Gaguim g'delim. Oh boy, Gaguim is yearning. Tshuka, shemishtekik ma'id, he's very strongly desires. Tshuka even more than desires. Tshuka is sometimes even love, actually. Tshuka, love, Havav Tshuka. Very much drawn to, doing dalim, with very strong yearnings. Yagagoyim. V'hurak mitzad ha'etzem. So even though, he's explaining now, even though at times it comes out as gals, but it's not necessary that it has to come out, but even when it does come out like that, hurak mitzad ha'etzem, hanu lefishu atzmei muhusei ve'en bezeh shum kavana klal. It's only because of that, because he's one with him. The Atzmi Muhusei, this child, is one with the father, with the parent. It's not a kavana. And here's a good example. It doesn't matter here the quality of the father or the child. Eichduhu means what state he's in. Eichduhu, what kind of person it is. In other words, with friends, you choose your friends. Some people you like, some people you don't like. For a healthy father not to like it is not possible. He's not going to like his child. He's not going to be desirous child. I'm not getting into unhealthy people now. So Eichus, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's a smart child. He's going to like his child more. You know. I know we have favoritism. There are parents who show favoritism. But first of all, the question is if that's a healthy thing altogether. And it's usually a sign of something not right. Because it's your child. To say your child, one child, let's say, doesn't perform as well as another, is less connection to you. So if you're a healthy person, you may put more effort and you compensate, whatever, but it doesn't change the fundamental connection between parent and child.
Sometimes you expect more of a child.
Yeah, but expectation is all, but I'm talking about the pure, God forbid, something happens to that child. A healthy person is not going to have less pain than a child that's, let's say, again, I'm talking healthy, and I'm not talking now, remember, we're talking about stripping it of everything. Obviously, if a parent sees a child doing something that has more nachas, another child may have less nachas that moment. But if that spills over into the atzmizdika connection, that I would say, as a matter of fact, an unhealthy person still has the atzmizdika connection, but they're driven by externals. Like if people compliment them, some people will have favoritism based on others, but that's because they're not in touch with their atzmizdika connection to their own child. But the connection is there. The bottom line is, he's explaining there's a connection between two things, and that drives everything.
Can you say the child that's not performing? I'm just going there because I want to go there for a minute. Can you say the child that's not performing or is not acting in the way you expect him to act, or even religiously, and the other child is doing everything that you want him to do?
So you may have more nachas, you may have more giluyim, I would say. And frankly, as human beings, you like to be in a pleasant situation and not pleasant one. So let's say a person like that will say, I'd rather hang out with this child than with that one. The other one just gives me agmas nefesh. I understand that. But we're talking here, the connection, the pure connection between child and father doesn't really change at all with that. You can't compare them. That would be like the example, Afal Pishachat Yisrael, by the Eibishter too, of course. But it's just the connection is there. And you see it, in God forbid, in time of sakana. I mean, would a father like that or a parent like that say, if the child's in sakana, I have no time for him because I'm busy with my other child that I'm having nachas from? That, to me, that would be a real problem. There are people who would do that, but that's because of their own discomfort. But atzmizdika connection is atzmizdika connection. Let's not distinguish. Listen, a parent and a child has many level relationship. He's talking here, strip everything else away. Let's say two children, everything considered. Forget about whether one is giving nachas to the other. If you don't have that, it's definitely, you see it. When you do have giluyim, the giluyim can conceal and a person can think. And some parents actually do. I mean, I know parents that do show favoritism. It's a fact of life. It's not a stira to this. To me, it's them. It's not because the Ayin Beis is wrong, because they're wrong. They're not doing what they should be doing. That would be like somebody not, I think it's quite clear. I don't need needs a lot of. Needs explanation is in the context here. And I'm using strong examples. Let's just use a plain example. Let's say, to all children being equal. There's an asmizdika connection. Then there's times, like he says, where it's very strong A parent and a child can be apart for a year. You don't every day feel that missing. And then there are times you just have a surge, you miss your child, like you said, or the other way around. Anyway, bottom line is that it's not totally in echus of av. And the revelation of desire here is that the atzmi mamish is drawn and is revealed in this. The example for this above, in the essential desire of atzmus and sof in the souls of Israel. It's only because they're rooted in atzmus. I mean, he's going to say this, but a good example would be if it wasn't that way. So, like others like to say, that okay, you were chosen when you behaved. Not he rejected you and chose someone else. By us, that's like that's it's a Gaitnish does it. It's not like that. When Moshe is up on Har Sinai, begging for these days, begging for the Eden, the Eibusher says, "Go build another nation." No. There's no mises. You're connected. I use this a lot in therapy. Actually, I said you're connected. God Himself was saying, I want another nation. He's like, I want a divorce. I want another nation. And Moshe says no, because Moshe knew the connection is as fundamental. The Eibusher didn't know that. So whatever the reason, he needed a human being, slachti kidvarecha, he needed to elicit it. It's like in any case, two people can love each other, and there's a real betrayal. So a third person sees the deeper love and elicits it until he gets it going. Because they just want it to be begili. It's not just enough, be'etzem we're connected. But the bottom line is, what does it say? Yeah, right. Or even b'chut mesamish, it says it's kilach hamasi aletzim b'avonim. That he destroyed, that he let his anger out on the wood and the stones instead of on the people.
Instead of the people, I mean, millions were killed.
But you and I are here.
Yeah. Because
they're rooted. Only your forefathers and your fathers is cheshek Hashem. Does God? These words, cheshek, chuke, rotzen. Cheshek is also desire. In Hebrew, there are a lot of words for desire. I guess cheshek is. You could say lust, yeah. You could say lust, but here it means positive lust. But it's a desire. Would be the real way they probably translate cheshek chuka. Shezeu harotzim b'neshamas Yisrael atzmam pnei shemushashim ba'atzmus. That's the desire in their souls themselves because they're rooted in atzmus. V'zer shekashes le'merubchem mechol ha'amim. Yeah, it's this week's the A. Le'merubchem mechol ha'amim. Yeah, yesterday. Not le'merubchem. How do they translate merubchem? Right. Atem at kol ha'amim. Not because of your quality, in other words, not because of your numbers, not because of your outnumbering all the nations. Not because of the quality or the advantage of the souls. That's why there's a desire in them. The mashakasu le'merubchem einakon ala ribi bekamus. Le'merubchem doesn't just mean that they're not ribi bekamus, quantity, many in quantity, a multitude in quantity. Shari ribi bekamus eina tam alav. He's explaining actually merubchem does not mean number. Because what does it mean? Since when do more things create love? Ribi bekamus, a larger number in quantity, is not a reason for love. So when he says le'merubchem, what does he mean? He has to be a reason that there would be a havamina that because of that I would love you more than others. It means le'merubchem meaning on your quality, on your not just in quantity, on your quality, because of your special qualities. That you have abundant qualities, ubamayla, and advantages in quality level, qualitatively. So even though you have those qualities, it's not because of that quality and advantage that you souls have That's why God desires them. Rak mitzad atzmam. It's only because of themselves. Le merubchem. She'em mishroshim ba'atzmos, because they're rooted in the essence. Umishum ze'esh ben rotzen atzmi mamish. And that's why He has in them a rotzen atzmi mamish, like the father to a child. He has an essential desire. This is b'li kavana legami. This is higher than any intention. Yesh gamkin rotzen shu b'teik of gadol. Now he's explaining it further. This is all the parentheses, by the way, the whole chapter almost. Because there's also another desire, shu b'teik of gadol, that's very intense. He's making comparisons of different types of desires here. And that's a desire when you want, in Yonim Nailim, you want exalted, you want refined, or you can say higher things. There's, for example, a desire to eat, a desire to study. Let's say he's maybe giving an example. He had another word. We have here so far several words for Ratzin. We have Ratzin, he said Shuka, he said Cheshek, now he says Shaige. Shaga Sari.
Shaga means in a literal sense.
Roar.
The roar.
Yeah, but Shaige here, emotional roar, is a type of excitement inside a person.
There's a build-up of the crescendo. So
Right. But there's a word of Shaige, like, right. It's like almost like a grunt.
Give me that.
Right, yeah. So he's saying here, he's saying a different type of this desire. You want something special. That's the take of his pilas, the intensity of excitement that comes from the intensity of a desire and something very exalted, very elevated, lofty. He's going to give an example. Ukamoi shog yishag al noveyo. Yeah, Neva. Shog Yishag, he's talking about the Eibishter, I believe. That Shog Yishag on Nevehu, it's like a double word, Shog, but he's like
roaring and about the
roaring and
roaring about his Nevehu.
On the base of Mikdash, the Churban. Yeah. Oh, that's where the was Yishag. That's where it says about Chedeshov that. Yeah, no, he says that. That in the month, the Chedesh Aryeh, Allah Aryeh, Vivin Ariel, then he also says that the Chedesh of the Yored, I forgot the expression right now, Yored Shaige, because it says Eibush to Shaige Salakim, yeah. And I think he brings that pasuk, Sheig Yishag al Neveyu, so he basically roared and cried out on the veil on his building, on his home. When the base Mikdash was destroyed. Is this Echa? I think so. Because there's all the doubles there. I think so, the Shin, the letters. Yeah. Ukmei Shamar Azal, like Razal say, Gimel Mishmeres have it. Yeah. Gimel Shmeres have it. There are three, a mishmer is a night watches. There are three watches, not necessarily one night. It could be. The night here it says Hava Halayla. Yeah, the night has three time spans, and therefore three. What's the word for it? When people, when people divide, let's say, a day into portion, but there's a word for it. Time
spans.
It's even more than that. Shifts, that's the word.
But it's a half a day, it's a night.
So he's saying here night, yeah, Gimel Shmarish Havi Halayla.
So you're talking about 4 hours each.
Right. Here he's talking to 3, okay.
There's 6 in a day, it's like there's 6 seasons in a year.
Right, yeah, so he says Gimel Shmarish Havi Halayla. The night has 3 shifts, that's the word I wanted. Val Kol Mishmer, and each shift, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv V'Shayeg Kari. In each shift, the Eibishter sits and roars like a lion.
What is it saying?
Oili shechrafti as beisi. Woe to me that I destroyed my home. V'glesi as bonai, and I exiled my children.
Fix it right now.
Beina umas.
Let him do it right now.
V'glesi as bonai, and I exiled my children between the nations.
Every day gets a day closer, right?
Shehi ashayga al hedra gili al lakus. What's the roar? Why is he roaring? Is the roar over the lack of the divine revelation. The Bisman Beis Hamikdash Hayugilei Ein Sof Mamish Lamata. By the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there was actual divine revelation Mamish below. V'Hagilu b'Neshamas Yisrael, and the revelation was in the souls of Israel. V'Alzeh Washaige, and this is the crying out, the roar al Hed Hagili, the painful roar, and the lack of the Gili. See, this is also, remember, this is the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, so it's still Shiva de Nechemta. I said it's the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. It's the Shiva de Nechemta. He's just concluding here, because you see, he's talking about the time. Because above there's a great desire for there to be revelation below. Yeah, not just you want it. God also wants it.
I love why we want it as much as him, but probably
like the Maimer, Nesavit, God desired. Nesavit, Nachavort, Cheshek, Taive, Shuke, Cheshek, Shaige. God is Nishtekik, it says Nishtekik. We have to make a study on these different levels of.
How many did he mention?
So far, 4 or 5. Ratzon is a general word desire.
6 shifts. What?
Other words besides desire.
To look up.
I don't know any. What do I know?
This guy broke all his desires. He has no more desires. And desire. I use Ratzon as desire, craving. You have to find words also respectable. This lust is a good word.
I didn't say lust. I said craving.
No, I know. We had the word before lust.
Yeah. God desired to be a dir b'tachtenim. And this is all Ratzon, by the way, not Tainu. Valkain al hedragili, and therefore, when there's a lack of this hedragili, when there's it's the opposite, the antithesis, that there's not a resistance, the opposite of gili, lack of revelation. V'kolshkin begili naila kazeh.
Obscuring.
And especially the lack of such a great gilui, there's a terrible roar, a loud roar. Basically, he's saying now that he's not talking about a Ratzon Atzmi, I believe, but let's see where he goes with this. But this desire is a Ratzon Giluyim. There he wants Gili. That's what's the Shagi. That's what he said. He's explained it's not a Ratzon Atzmi. Because Ratzon Atzmi is there even when there isn't the Gilui. So the Ratzon B'Teiku goes to Ratzon B'Inyanim Nailim. What's in Inyanim Nailim that he gave the example? Divine revelation. And when there's a lack of that, when there's no the dir b'tachteim, God's home is not there, and the Gilui is not there, that's what the same thing, the desire of God in Torah mitzvahs is also a Ratzon in the revelation of godliness. However, the desire and love of God in the souls of Israel fundamentally, that's not because of any nachas they give. That's not because of any revelations. It's not because of a divine revelation. Rather from the etzem. That's why it says that Av Gam Zeis, despite all that, that they're in their land of Eveim, of their enemies, I will not be despised. I will not despise them. Yeah. Because it says sometimes that faket, like mi yovi bebotzer, that even if the child does not despise the father, even when he's dressed in all kinds of dirty clothing. Afil bizman harichuk, even the time of distance. The ben kach or ben kach banayhem, because this either ben kach or ben kach, either like this or like that, they are my children. Ulachlifim buma acheres iefsher. This is like one of these sikhs of the Rebbe where he goes into, like the Miriam Bas Bilga type of sikh. And to change and to exchange them for another nation is impossible. No matter how they are, God forbid, meaning the worst, impossible to exchange them.
Whatever status it is.
Okay, fine. Ummah, because it's going on Ummah maybe. That's why, not Shem. Shahu, Ech Shahu, the Ummah.
That's it. Either any situation.
Okay, fine. Before he said a similar expression when he said Ech Duhu. He's not talking Lashon Yachid here. You cannot exchange them. Which means that it's a fundamental, essential desire and connection. And yet he still calls it desire. Because desire at the end of the day is still being drawn to it. If you remember, they defined desire at the beginning of the chapter. Yachpes be'ezer davar. So there's a tiny, there's a rotzen. Okay, fine. Lishum. ובדוגמה כזה, שבנשמת ישראל ביסגלוס עצמוס הנשמה ברוצן עצמי לעצמוס אין ברוך. Okay, that's from Hashem, God to us. ודוגמה כזה, an example for this is בנשמת ישראל ביסגלוס עצמוס הנשמה ברוצן עצמי לעצמוס אין is also the other way around. The bend to the Av is Neshama Yisrael, when it's Bizgalus Atzmus HaNeshama, when it's the revelation of the essence of his soul, B'rotzen Atzmi L'Atzmus Ein Sev Baruch Hu. 3 Atzmus he's saying here. Bizgalus Atzmus HaNeshama, B'rotzen Atzmi L'Atzmus Ein Sof. There's the revelation of the essence of his soul in an essential desire to the essence of the Ein Sof, B'lishum Kavana B'lishum Uvukash Klal, without any intention and without any objective. Saying the same thing from the bottom up. There's a desire that's of intense excitement, and that's a desire for revelation of godliness. Now he's going the other way. It's like Eibishter has that desire, the Shag of Eibishter, like the Tareg, the cry, the bellow, the yell of an ayil is a not a deer. What's an ayil? A ram. Alafike moyim. Huh? Yeah. Alafike moyim on the on the banks of the pools. Afikim. Afike moyim on the banks of the river, of the water. Shubchins atzaikal heder agil delikus. Ayil tarig. Tarig is similar to shag, so not as strong, but is the cry on the lack of elikus, of the revelation of godliness. Like my soul is thirsty for you. Huh? Kama is my flesh is aching, I believe. In a land that is siyah, that is desolate, barren. Oif actually means tired, but it means okay. Sivaif, desolate and barren, whatever. Oif, bli moyim. This is Tillim.
This from David Melech. And when he would say this, why is he saying this when he had a base of mikdash?
No, because he was right. He didn't have.
Firstly, he didn't have a base of mikdash. This Shlomo Melech built it.
He was right. He was in the desert.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole Tillim is crying out. How much of Tillim is about good things? It's all.
Well, today's Tillim was good things.
There are plenty of beautiful things there, but a lot of it is the crying out for need, in time of need. Because there's no Shalo Yesh Gili Bli Mayim, because there's no Gili Alikus. So it's a crying out. Who harotzen ba Giluyim? That's a desire in Giluyim. That's a desire for revelations.
But in those days,
Kamoi came. 1 second.
Bombers, didn't they? Before they built the base of
You think that there was no reason to cry then?
I don't know.
There's plenty of reason to cry. Yeah.
On a personal level, but what about on a general level? People were able to get revelation.
So what do you mean? There's wars.
We're talking about revelation.
There's wars.
No, we're talking specifically revelation. It was revelation then. There was revelation before the base.
Not as much as there was wars all the time. The Yidden were being persecuted.
Still the oral,
Since the Tzimtzum Addition, there's always something to cry about. Remember that. Because there's always more, and so on. Well, Kamoikin Harotzen Demili B'Shamayim, he's really laying it out here. Every desire, every level is here. So if you ever need a chapter Remember chapter 64. A chapter to identify with different levels of crying out for something. Here's your chapter.
How do you define which level is which level?
He's not defining here. He's just saying it in general terms. In other places. I mean, you'd have to really research other places where he brings this. For all practical purposes, this is just, it's not really that irrelevant what level it is. He's trying to explain two types of desires, actually. Mili b'shamayim. Who do I have in heaven? He's alluding here a little to the Alter Rebbe's expression. Mili b'shamayim means who do I have in heaven? So the literal interpretation of the pasuk is, where's God? But the Alter Rebbe said, Mili b'shamayim. Even shamayim is not. I don't want something. I don't want heaven. I don't want your heaven. I don't want your Gan Eden. I don't want your Elam Haba. I want im chalei chafatzti. That means right. She'ena reitze b'giluim. How do you become Malkum? Even this. Well, you don't want Giluim. Even this, I'm become Malkum. Nevertheless, yes, there's some objective, there's some desire. Im shem mavukas she'reitze b'amshachas ha'atzmis. Whether the mavukas, the objective is that he wants this essential hamshacha, not Giluim, but he wants atzmus. Because you see, the Alter Rebbe saying that, or wanted it. The hamshacha, the connection atzmi he has with atzmus, he didn't need to want. You have that without wanting. He wanted something. Even that is what he wants. However, is the etzem itself. Oi sharetzel liskal. It's giving two interpretations. Or his desire is to be encompassed there. But either way, there's an objective. All this has some objective. But true ratzna atzmi, just like we spoke before with God's ratzna atzmi to us. Humasha etzem aneshama tiseder b'chinas atzmus alakus bli shum avukish klal. Is what the essence of the soul is awakened. It is awakened. So there is a gilui, but not for giluyim. The b'chinas atzmus alakus, and the essence of godliness, bli shum avukish klal, not just avukish klal. Altogether, absolutely no objective, bli shum cheshbon l'nafshi, and absolutely no calculation. Cheshbon l'nafshi meaning there's no. It just is. There's no calculated effort here.
It's a effort without wanting anything.
What?
It's a want without wanting anything.
It's a want, but the question is what you want. Let me finish and let's read. That's only because he's rooted in atzmus. And therefore, the revelation of this essence of the soul, it's like a shalheves, a flame that rises on its own. That's the Russian from Rashi, beginning of Baal Eitzcha. She's drawn. She's drawn. Z. Tzitzach. Is drawn to the divine with a essential desire. Omnam hakavana kan. This is all the parentheses, by the way. Let's go back to the beginning of the parentheses. Okay, Amnam Kavana Khan is not talking about this highest desire. Amnam Kavana, however, the intention here, there has some deeper and inner intention, but it's also higher than a reason. That's the ratzon, the desire and the creation of the bringing the worlds into being. The Amar Azal al Pasuk Shukuf Amudei Sheish. Like the Rizal say on the pasuk, Shukuf Amudei Sheish. Sheik comes from like the thigh. Amudei Sheish, the pillars of marble. Sheik. So what's the word sheik? Shukov is also from the word chukah. You know what are we talking? What kind of thighs? So he says like Sheik of Zeh ha'elim shenishteka kadosh baruch hu b'riyaseh. Sheik of Amudei Sheish refers to Zeh. Sheik is referring to the world that God has a strong desire. The reason it's called thighs, because thighs are connected to pleasure and stuff like that. So, that's the world. God is, back to Chukah, that He desires deeply, strong,
amazing.
To create it. 1 second. What's the intention, the inner intention of this? This is not like Atzmus Ratzon in the Shamas Yisrael. Hu mishum shenesava kosh baruch hu lizlei dir b'tachtenim. The deeper kavanah is because he desired there should be a dir b'tachtenim. V'arigam al zeh ein tam b'asog klal rak mipnei shekach hu l'tzein yisbarach. Also on this, there's no reason or comprehension at all, but that's how he desired.
See,
Okay.
He had this parentheses. There'd be almost no. When he first wrote it, this chapter was like 15 lines or something.
Okay, so the Hemshech would be 1,499 pages instead of 1,500 pages. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, but this would be a whole chapter, though, even 15 lines?
The chapters were added
Oh,
later.
that was even later.
So, I'm sure it would not have been, but the parentheses are just as important outside the parentheses. It's only a parentheses because if you want the flow, he's talking about two types of desire. So one is here, explains the first one, and then the second one. The parentheses are not like, you can't really read it without the parentheses, to be very honest. You can read it technically, you could read it, but you can't understand it properly. That's why I can't skip the parentheses, especially with this one. But anyone, okay, so let's sum this up. Oh, God Almighty. And this is all the first desire. So he began like this. He's giving another reason. He's coming to explain that in addition to the desire klali, it's a general desire for existence, which is the makiv klali of ak and higher tier law. There's a desire in each particular world, a ratzon prati. I gave a few examples, but the example I was using today was, think of it like in a corporation, a hierarchy or an army. So you can have an entire department head, and then each sub-department has a head of that department, and then they all answer to even a bigger head. So you have a ratzon, the one who gives orders to the whole team. Then to team leaders rather. Each leader gives directions to its specific team.
That's Ak.
Ak would be the commander-in-chief, yeah.
Well, commander-in-chief would be, should be less than commander. Commander-in-chief would be
In your mind, if you want, I have no problem saying commander-in-chief is Ak.
the one above it, which is called...
I mean, obviously, so where do you want to begin? So what would you like Ak to be?
What?
If you want to start levels, there's a lot of levels before the tzimtzum.
Executive director or something.
It's fine, so let it be executive director. It's fine with me.
He's talking hungry at that time.
Look, it depends. If you start counting from after the tzimtzum, yeah. If you start before the tzimtzum, you have all these levels before the tzimtzum too, subtly. But regardless, Ak is definitely the overall. Everybody answers to Ak. But as I explained before, Ak is not just barking orders. Ak gives life to all of existence. It's also in energizing it, concealed. And it has a relationship in the sense that certain parts of Ak are revealed even to the individual team, like Amunah and other things. But bottom line is, it's an overall. Then we also have a specific, each department, let's call it Atzilus, Bria, each department has its team head. And there's Kesser, and also in Moichin, there's Kesser of Mizah, and Kesser, he didn't even go there. But let's just talk like that. In this chapter, he's beginning to explain also to understand further or more, better understand this detail, the specific ratzon, in addition to the general ratzon of Ak. He began with saying there's two types of desire. And we're not talking about the desire that comes a rational one and a super rational. In the super rational desire itself, there's two. This chapter is dedicated to the first one. So let's just analyze what he said here. I'm just summing up real pshat here. Then we'll get to Havana. So what did he say? That the first one is sheyichbetz. He wants something and is drawn to it and does everything to try to acquire it. And he says before the parenthesis, Ein zeh mishum eizeh tam ba'asaga. It's not for any reason. So a reason, like I said, an apple on the tree, there's a reason. I'm hungry, I want the apple. That's not what he's talking about, that type of desire. He's talking about the desire that he wants it, even if there's no reason. But the parentheses, he breaks this further. There can be no reason, but there's a kavanah. There can be an intention, but it's not rational necessarily. That's basically what he's saying. To understand that, he speaks about a third level, where there's no intention at all. So you have three things. Aratzon atzmi, no intention at all. Aratzon atzmi is because you're part of me, I'm connected with you. Forever and ever, unconditionally, absolutely no reason behind it. There's no intention, I don't need anything from it, you don't need anything from it. You and I are bonded forever. The example in our world is a father and a son. parent and child. The example above is Atzmus and Neshamas Yisrael. We're talking about purely that. We're not talking about the Eibishter wants a gili. Like I said before, a father wants, because you have a Ratzon Atzmi, that's why I want to spend time with you. But that's already Ratzon for Giluyim. But even if there was no Giluyim, even if it wasn't there, in other words, I love my son and my child, not because my child is smart and I like to sit and talk to him. It's because I love him, that's why I like to talk to him. Not because I talk to him, in other words, not because of what I'm going to gain from it. It's the connection is there, and that leads to a lot of other things you want to do with that person. That's a Ratzon Atzmi. That only exists with things that are fundamentally connected, that are not driven by any plan. Now, of course, you could ask, why did God want Neshamas, Mushas, and Atzmus? He's not even going there. There's no want there. It's like an extension. It's just a natural, kavyochel, natural thing. If you ask the question, is he muchrich to have Neshamas? God's not muchrich in anything, but clearly it seems like if there's Atzmus, there's Neshamas. However you twist and turn it, whatever you say. That's all in Giluyim, but when he's speaking here is Mushas and Atzmus Mamash.
Everything is Mushas and Atzmus, not more the Shabbos.
So,
the whole reason why he created the world and everything.
That he made a distinction. No, he's saying the world is a kavana, and the shamas is no kavana. He said this clearly.
He asked him the shamas of the tzaddikim whether to create the world.
But they could say these are all levels. The question is, let me just first state what he says here, and then we'll talk about Havana. Let's just we must get out what he says before we try to. So the first thing he said is a thing that's higher than Kavana. That's not what he's talking about here, however. So it's higher. Kavana is a Ratzon Atzmi. He spoke about it two ways. The Ratzon Atzmi of Atzmus to Neshamas Yisrael, no matter what, he's connected with them. Okay? As opposed to the Ratzon and Giluyim, where God cries out or roars because of the lack of Gili of the Beis HaMikdash. That's not the Ratzon Atzmi. The same thing is from below up. There's a desire, an essential connection between the Neshama and God, not for any gain, not for any purpose at all. Not even the purpose I want to connect to Atzmus, like the Alter Rebbe said. He doesn't use the Alter Rebbe here. That's also not. It's just a Ratzon Atzmi, it's connection. Then there's a Ratzon, a lower one for a Gili. That we want to be connected. We want to feel the Gili. We want to, what he said here, example, Gilei Lakus, he cries out, Tzama L'cha Nafshi. Either because he wants to, the Amshachas Atzmis, he wants to draw down the Atzmis, or because he wants to be encompassed in it. But true Ratzon Atzmi is without any intention at all. That is not what he's talking about here. The next level is a Ratzon that has an intention, but it's super rational. It's not based on a logical reason. In other words, like I said before, you're hungry. I have a reason. That's why I want this piece of food. The Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu is an example of this Ratzon. It has an intention. Like he said before, he wants Gili. It's not just a desire without anything. There's a desire with a purpose. The purpose is there's an objective. The objective is Mashiach will come. There'll be a dir b'tachtein. Araveda. He wants Araveda. So this doesn't have a reason. You can't say it's a reason. It's a desire. It's a Ratzon. The Sava. There's no reason, but there is a purpose. And that's what he's talking about here. The Ratzon of Isava Se'elamus. And then there's lower than that, as a desire with a reason. That's what he said here. Basically, three types of levels of Ratzon. And the one he's talking about is the middle one. The one there's a Ratzon for Kavana, Bali Tam.
Which one is the Alter Rebbe?
He doesn't say the Alter Rebbe. He doesn't mention him, so I can't know. Okay. He just uses the same pasuk. It sounds like the Alter Rebbe, but the Alter Rebbe, it sounds like the Alter. I would say it is. That is where you want Giluyim. The Alter Rebbe is you want something. He wanted something. He said it. The Alter Rebbe was not sufficient in just say, listen, I have a Ratzon Atzmi to be Atzmus. He says, I want. But the Alter Rebbe, I can interpret both ways. You can interpret it both ways if you really want. Here he says, Mili b'shamayim she'ena reitze b'giluyim. You don't want the Giluyim. But Pashtus, the Alter Rebbe didn't want Giluyim, he wanted Atzmus, which would put him in the category of the middle category. But you could interpret the Alter Rebbe as really the Atzmis, that he desires the thing itself, he doesn't want even Atzmus, in a way. It's not once. In other words, you can want Atzmus, like you said here, as a kavana, or you could Atzmus I just, like you said, the words he uses, I'm not sure the Alter Rebbe you can interpret both ways. We'd like to interpret Alter Rebbe the highest level, but if you really read Pshat here, it sounds a little more like the middle level. Not sure. That's something that can be looked into. We have to go back to Alter Rebbe's expression to see exactly how. Or maybe you can type Alter Rebbe both ways. Remember, there's a Maila in Giluyim. He's just speaking about a level where there's no Gili. The point being, I would distinguish between the two. You could say, so what's the difference? One person doesn't want, I don't want your Alam Haba, I don't want your Gan Eden, I want only you alone. So you can definitely interpret that as being the second level, because there's a kavanah here. Yeah, other people want Giluyim. This one wants a low level, and this one wants the thing itself. I want the Atem. He's going, well, he's smarter. Why would I go for half the prize? I want the whole prize, basically. You could interpret it like that. So there is a mavukish.
And he's a mushroom.
Now, 1 second. You could explain that why he wants it is because he's mushrish betzin. That's not a problem. No, it could be rooted in a deeper place. But the expression here is Giluyim. It's like a father has a connection with a child, like you said before. Not always do you see the deep yearning for your child. Let's say your child goes to yeshiva out of town. And one day you wake up and you say, oh, I really miss my son. I call him up. I want to spend time with him. Hopefully. Now, even if you don't do that, if one day you don't feel that, or the connection is there, and you have a natural being drawn to your child, even if there's no expression of it. But the second level he's talking here, there's a kavanah, is when you're calling him, not because you're calling because you're going to get something from him, it's because you fundamentally have a connection. That's why you call him. I just want to qualify what he's saying. He's not saying, why does God want Gilui Elokus in this world? Or why does God want Gilui Elokus with Eden? He wanted, he says, that, he cries that my children, Iglesias, that I exiled my children. It's because he has that connection. But that particular expression there is not coming from the Ratzon Atzmi, it's coming from the Ratzon that's already with a Kavanah. The Kavanah is, I want Gilui. Let's not dismiss the value of that. Then there's just a fundamental Ratzon where a person just has that desire, he's drawn. I would say one is not, I doesn't say these words, but I would say the Ratzon Atzmi, if I were to explain it, I would say it's without any deliberate effort. It's just there. And Ratzon with Kavanah, even higher than Tam, there is an effort required. You need to do something.
Why would you have to
How can you do anything for Ratzon?
No. The Tzitzich is the highest one, no?
No.
Yeah. Look, read it. Bli shum avakush. What are you talking about? Bli shum avakush kla.
Kavanah can, but okay.
It wasn't action.
Yeah, you can make you can force it.
Amna makavana kan. No. That's the Tzitzich is what I just said. Yeah, the Tzitzich. What I mean by effort, I'm not talking about exertion. If you want Gilui, you have to do something about it. If you want to sit and speak to your child, you have to sit down and speak to him. Ratzon Atzmi doesn't require anything. You just have you have a connection to your child. That's what I meant.
In itself is not action, but it leads to action.
Yeah, I meant some type of action. Ratzon by definition means being drawn to.
Right.
So that even the Ratzon Atzmi is still being drawn to.
He's moving on himself.
However, is being drawn to for a purpose, and that is the Gilui or whatever he calls here. Or there's being drawn and there's no purpose at all. It's just that you're drawn. That's it.
Because it's you.
Right, exactly. And then there's no intention. There's no purpose. So that's it. That's the three levels. Listen, you could all struggle with it, but I find it's a little upshot, but it's not
I think the explanation
beyond.
is when you're drawn to something, you're basically moving away from yourself. But if it's the ultimate one, the one that's Tzitzich, is really, you're not really going on yourself. It's you, because the thing that you're being drawn to is you. So you're not really moving away from yourself. In a very subtle way.
Subtly, perhaps, but you could also say Giluyim is the Gilui of you. I wouldn't necessarily put it exactly like that. On a certain level I would, but not completely. I would say, what I would say in that context, I would rephrase it just a drop. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you fundamentally. It's just that you could say Gili Dira B'Tachtenim is the Gili of me. That's what he wants. He doesn't just want to be there, he wants to also be revealed. So I don't know if the revealed means that he's away from himself. That's why when he says that Rebishter wants the Gili of Elokus, that's why I wouldn't say move him. But I would say that one is as soon as you say the word kavana or tam, it has its seer. That's for sure. That's the key. It has some what's the word? Identity. It has some, how would I define seer? Some shape, some manifestation. That's the key. You can call that maybe moving it, because you could say Etzem doesn't have any shape. So the fact that God is revealed in the Beis Hamikdash, it's unbelievable, gewaldic, everything is fine. But there's a manifestation, there's a definition of something. And the best proof of it is that when it's not there, there's something lacking. The Atzmizdika connection, I mentioned the Sikh from Chelik Hey. Let's not forget that even though you could say, why is God disturbed by the Chum Beis Hamikdash? The Etzem is still in place because he wants Giluyim, and Giluyim, as the Rebbe explains, is negay in the Etzem. That's a gift, yeah. But the distinction is one is there even if there's no manifestation, and the other is not.
This is a very interesting thing.
I'll give you an example. I had to deal with a child whose father rejected him, basically rejected him completely, for many reasons. And it wasn't justified reasons even. I mean, there's never justified. Huh?
His judgment.
In his judgment, yeah.
In his judgment, that his father rejected.
No, but he did. He doesn't want to see him. Doesn't want to talk to him. I helped reconcile the two. Reconcile them, thank God. And the father has, it was a shtick. It was his problem, it wasn't the son's problem. The son didn't sound like he did something. Even if he did something, I mean, how? So you come to terms or so. But the point I'm saying here is, I no doubt that the father loved his child. There's not even a question in my mind. But that's not enough, obviously. Father said to me, so I love my child without ever seeing him. He told me this once. Our love will always be there. So I used the opposite, obviously. I said, that's very nice, but, the main thing is that if you really love someone, you want to express it. You want to some way express it. He was making the case for the Atzmi, the Bible and Golos, so to speak. My point I'm trying to make here is that Aratzon Atzmi has no manifestation, no form. It's very powerful because it remains intact. It's like a foundation that can never be shaken. Like he says, never exchange this nation for anyone else, period. But are we satisfied with that? Obviously not. So God cries for the revealed. The revealed, I would say the revealed is some manifestation, some form of expression. Expression is the one I wanted to say. Some expression. So that's the difference. So you could have an expression. That's a kavana. There's an expression and a kavana. I mean, the expression may not be good either, because the first one is also an expression. It's tzitzach. He is looking for it. Okay, it's the matorah, it's the mavukash. That's the key.
He's happy with the situation now because he doesn't care about Giloyim, it seems, from the aphorism.
No. First of all, he's talking about himself and his connection. He wasn't talking about Golos. He didn't say, we don't want to Giloyim, He's talking about his connection. Okay, I think that's that. So that's the kavanah. And that's the first ratzon. What time is it now? Because today I have
10:18. 10:18.
I'm going to have to stop here.
Kitzur.
Yeah, Kitzur. Summary, Kitzur. Oid Yuvan Inyan Hanal. Oid Yuvan. I can say to better understand Oid Yuvan, to understand addition, how would you say Oid Yuvan? Oid Yuvan. Noch mehr wird man verstehen.
More understand.
To understand more.
Understand more of the above.
Of the above, about the general desire and the pratisdika and the detail. Yesh Beis b'nei ratzon. There are two types of desire. Let's see how he sums it up. I just summed it up one way. Let's see the Rebbe Rashab. The first desire, ratzon gali, ba'atiyah le'ezeh davar. A revealed desire, ba'atiyah, being leaning, an inclination to any particular thing.
Disposition,
By inclination,
Yeah. It's more than disposition. Disposition you could have without being inclined, just inside of you. I mean, it's yesh b'zeh kavana primis, and there is a kavana primis in this. Va'agav, this is a new one. The Rebbe is saying agav, and by the way, Yevayer explains inyan rotzen atzmi mitzad etzem, k'may rotzen b'shamas yisrael mitzad atzmi. This is interesting. He says agav. Explains it. Okay, fine. Like the chassid that corrected the Matikun Toas in the Kutei Torah. You know that one? Kutei Torah. And the Alter Rebbe had some typos. So it was a chassid correcting the typos. Another chesed said petach. He banged him on his head and said, "What are you talking? What are you doing? We're harving on the Likutei Torah to figure it out, and you're going here and you're making a correction. In other words, figuring out also there's a mistake. So even a mistake in Likutei Torah is also something worthwhile learning. So an agav from that Rebbe is also not bad. I'd rather have the Rebbe's parenthetical things than other people's ikar. So
corresponds with its long premise.
Yeah. He says agav, and as an aside, he explains Ratzon Atzmi, that comes from the essence, like the Ratzon, the desire of God in the souls on their own. The other way around. Ratzon Hashem is the desire of souls, godliness, belief shum mevukash, without any objective. And mevukash, usually when you say mokam mevukash, means you set out on a journey to get somewhere. A goal oriented. It's goal oriented. Mevukash means, okay, I'm getting out. Why am I going from here to here? Because I want to get there. So Gilui is a mevukash. Mili b'shamayim even is also a mevukash. So here, there's no such mevukash. It's a ratzon atzmi. V'yesh ratzon b'giluyim. Then there's a desire. This is all the agav. Then the desire for giluyim. Mitzad ha'gilui atzmai. Because he wants this revelation itself. Like the desire for the temple, Beis Hamikdash, and for Torah mitzvahs. For ratzon neshama b'gilui alakus, and the desire of the soul for divine revelation. V'amavur kan hu ratzon sheyesh bei tam pnimi. Interesting, is the Ratzon B'Giluyim similar to the Ratzon that has Tam Pnimi? From the Pnim, it seems there's yes. Here, almost mashma, it's a little different. That even the Ratzon Gili Atzmei is also for the Gili itself. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Because the fact that he says Ratzon B'Gili Alakus. Okay, you could say it's similar to that. Yesh B'Tam Tam Pnimi. There's a reason for it. There's a Tam Pnimi. Rakshu L'Maylam HaTam. However, it's higher than rational. Tam Pnimi here means there's an inner kavanah. It doesn't mean rational. This is the first level, Ratzon Mamash. The second chapter, next chapter, 65, is going to discuss that before this desire, there's a thing called Heskim. That's going to be the Hiseirus Klali that he spoke about earlier. There's a Heskim where you determine inside yourself. It's like a step before the desire. It's quite subtle and quite abstract. All to explain.
Do we have anything an marshal for that?
The next chapter you'll find Mashal. Yes, there is going to be a.
The Amish week, no, you turn on. Wrong.
Yeah, 100. Right.
We don't seem to have that quite that ability.
Well, it all depends. You see, the key thing why Ratzon Atzmi is a critical point here is because a Ratzon Atzmi, which is not what he's talking about, is coming from within. When it's coming from within, you don't need to even turn anything on and off. You have no control over it, in a way. Humans, for sure. It's just who you are. It's like an extension of yourself.
You said it's a level above.
So, the next chapter we'll talk about. So we did chapter 64, beginning of Discourse 17, page 120 and 121.